Hi everybody. Let's talk about paper cutting today and try this out. So, paper cutting is a form of art that mostly is considered a folk art because once paper became a little less expensive in the Middle Ages and stuff, it was kind of rare. But once it became not so expensive, then people started making artwork by cutting paper, and they've done it all over the world. So we can take a look at a few different kinds that are kind of well known, and then we will try this out for ourselves. So here's what I want to do is if you want to look this kind of stuff up, you can start at my website, adamoosart.com, and look at my art because I've been doing some paper cutting lately and I'm pretty interested in it. I think it's pretty cool. So I've done a lot of different things, mostly landscape stuff is what I'm working on. But I've also made some art for JP2, my parish church, and it's pretty interesting working with the liturgical art and things like that. But the paper cut is kind of a cool way to do that. It looks a little like the outline of a stained glass window, which is something that I like and that I want you to think about too, because you might use this idea of a stained glass window as part of your idea. So in Poland, paper cutting is pretty well known. It's called Vicinanci, and I'm not really sure if I'm pronouncing that exactly correctly, and it's pretty impossible to spell. But if you Google Polish paper cutting, then you can look it up and see if you can figure out how to pronounce it. And basically just means cutting paper, which is funny because most of these are just cutting paper in whatever language they are. So it's not a complicated idea, but as you can see, the designs get pretty complicated. The Polish ones are known for their layers of color, and the rooster is a pretty well known image. In Germany, it's called Scherenschnitt, okay, and that is where they are again just cutting paper. A lot of times they are somewhat symmetrical, so they fold it in half and cut part of it, although there may be places where it's not perfectly symmetrical. A lot of times those are just black paper on a white background, or sometimes white on a black background. The Chinese have also done paper cutting. I think they invented paper, so they probably were the first people to start cutting paper. Often they use a red paper for these designs, and so it's kind of interesting. And then maybe just look at stained glass windows because the idea that each of those pieces of glass has to be encased by the lead or the metal when they solder everything together inevitably leads to those dark lines sort of being the borders in between the shapes. And that can all kind of work out as we are thinking about this idea of a paper cut design. So um, this is one that I made, and I'm going to show you how to do something similar. And we're going to go in a couple different directions with this project and try a few different things out. So let me get some paper and we'll give this a try. Alright, cool, I'm back. So I got a piece of black paper. This is 9 by 12. It doesn't have to be black paper, but I think it looks the best, so if you can find some, go for it. But you can use any color you want, really. So let's think about this. If we want to do sort of that tree idea, first thing you're going to want to do is have a border on your paper. And if this is the first time you're doing this, I'd go ahead and make the border a little bit thicker, okay? So if you put two fingers up against there, that's a good width, okay? And then just draw the shape of a tree, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and draw the tree like this, and then to make this a little easier to cut out, make sure that it touches the edges on there. Okay, so it's touching the edges here, at least overlapping the edges. This part it's not exactly, but if we really wanted to, we could put a little hill in the background, okay, and then maybe a couple of clouds. And if we add those clouds into that area, then that gives us something to connect part of that tree to the background a little bit better, okay? So then what we want to do is, the easiest way to cut this out is actually to fold it in half, and then you can just cut it symmetrically. So you can look at which side you think looks the best, and then go ahead and pick that side for the side you're going to cut out, okay? Before you start cutting, I'd thicken your lines up a little bit, okay? So take your crayon and make these lines bolder, okay? Especially if this is the first time that you're doing this, you're going to want those lines to be thicker. That way the piece of paper, as you're cutting it out, doesn't get super thin and doesn't tear so easily. That being said, if you can find a fairly thick piece of paper like construction paper, that might make this first try a little bit easier, okay? But you can do it with really thin paper. You just have to be a little bit more careful. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to grab my scissors and we're going to start cutting this out. Alright, here we go. So I've got this folded in half, and I'm just going to start by cutting out one of the shapes, okay, and leave the white lines in place, okay. Since you don't want to save any of these pieces of paper, it's okay if you make cuts that end up snipping those parts out. So you just want to cut along there. And since we folded it in half, this is going to be a symmetrical cut. Now I'll show you some ways to do the design if you don't want it symmetrical, but let's start with this first as the example, okay? And moving the paper around gets to be a little bit tricky after a while, but you'll get it figured out. So I'll show you a few hints. So this gets us at least a start on here, and then we're going to have some way to get into those middle sections, and I'll show you a couple of ideas for doing that. Okay, regular scissors works pretty well for this. If you can start cutting from the middle and work your way towards the outside, the paper will keep its structure a little bit better. That's why we put the border on there in the first place. So we'll cut that area out. So let's just open this up and see how we're doing right now. Okay? Alright, so far that looks kind of cool. Right? We could stop right there if we really wanted to, but let's not. Let's push ourselves a little bit. So now we need to get into these sections here. So there's a few different ways to do that, okay? You could try just poking your scissors through there, but you're generally going to rip your paper that way, and that's not going to be the best way to take care of it. The other way is to use a hole punch to get yourself started, or an X-Acto knife, and I'll show you both of those ways so you have an idea of some of the options that you have. Okay, so here's the first way. If you got a hole punch at your house, then just reach into that area there and punch a hole into the middle of the section, okay? You'll have to work out close. Some of those you're not going to be able to reach to right away, but once you keep cutting a little bit farther, you can get a little bit more in there. So you can do the hole punch, and then before you start trying to cut the shape, make the hole a little bit bigger. So just cut that hole a little bit wider, and then you can continue to cut. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. If you're having trouble getting to a certain shape, you might think about moving your scissors in from the bottom. So if I'm coming in from the top of the paper like this, That's one way to make the cut, but I can also take my scissors and I can come in from the bottom as well, and then I can make that cut a little bit differently. So if you're having trouble getting to a certain area, try cutting from underneath instead of from on top of the paper. So I can bring the scissors in here from underneath the paper and make that snip. It's really a lot easier in some senses to just snip a little and let the scissors end up where it does. So make smaller snips and let them overlap each other, and the little pieces will fall out, and you'll get lots of little small pieces instead of trying to cut one big shape out of there. Okay, so we'll keep working on that. So as I go in, and you kind of have to turn the paper and look at it from a lot of different directions as you're working on making those cuts. So we'll work on getting all that paper out of there. Try to just be careful when things get really thin at the edge. That's when you're going to end up tearing the paper. Okay? Now you can repair it if you just take another piece of paper and glue it onto the back of it and then recut it. You can kind of get away with repairing the paper a little bit, and it might not show up too much if you glued it on the back. So we'll see. If I end up making a mistake, we'll try that. So that's one way to get into those center sections. And then let me show you the other option that you have, okay? And you may or may not have this option depending on what your parents think about it. Okay, so let's look at this. Now I've got my cutting mat here. This is one of those self-healing cutting mats that you can cut onto. And then I've got my mat knife, or my utility knife. I like the ones that have the snap-off blade, because if the blade gets dull, you just take your pliers and snap it off and you have a new sharp blade again. And that lets you work a little bit quicker. And you always want to keep your knife pretty sharp, because if it cuts easily, you won't be pushing too hard and trying too hard, and then it won't slip, okay, and you won't cut yourself. So, but be careful. So keep your hands out of the way, and really, you don't have to cut everything out with the knife, but you can. When I'm working, I actually cut the whole shape out with the knife, and in some ways that lets me work a little bit faster, and if I'm careful, okay, everything goes just fine, and then I can follow along those lines pretty well, and I can cut out those shapes one at a time, and it works pretty well. Okay, and once you get a feel for exactly how hard you have to push with the paper, okay, you'll get that. And I have 2 layers of paper here, so that makes it a little bit tricky. But you can always cut those out. So if your mom and dad are cool with this, then you can try that out. If not, okay, you can use the hole punch. If your mom and dad want to help you out and just get you started, you can always do this. Okay, they could just help you by making a slice in each piece, and that just gets you started. Okay, and then since you're started with that, then you can put that knife away, and you've at least got your scissors into that place, and then you can continue doing the same thing that we did before and just cut out and open up those shapes. Okay, so let me finish cutting this all out. I'll open it up and show you what we ended up with at the end of it. Alright, so I'm almost done, but I wanted to show you these too. I've got these cool scissors. These are like pruning shears, and they just squeeze open and close. They're super sharp, which is good for this. But sometimes after you've been cutting for a while, even if your scissors is comfortable, it starts pushing into your hand and it starts hurting your hand a little bit. So this type of scissors kind of keeps that from happening, because you don't have to have your thumbs and your fingers in a loop at all. Okay, you just kind of squeeze and it pops open for you. You don't have to open it. You just worry about actually making the little snip and the cut. So that's a pretty cool little scissors. I think I found mine in like the garden section, okay, at Home Depot or Lowe's or someplace like that. So these little pruning scissors, but they work pretty good for this type of paper cutting too. And they're really sharp, so they get in there and they do a pretty good job of taking care of those fine little details that you're trying to finish up. Okay, so let's put that aside for a second. Let's see what we ended up with. Okay, see how everything looks. Should be symmetrical. Yeah, so we've got our tree here and we've got the two clouds on the side. I know sometimes the symmetry looks a little strange, okay, and that's okay. If we didn't really like those, we could always take it out. So when in doubt, leave it alone, and then you can always go and take something out later. But once you take it out, you can't put it back. So we could just stop right here if we felt like this was pretty cool, and we could just finish up. So we could grab a piece of paper and put it behind it and make that for our background. Okay, so we could do that, and that's it. You could glue that down onto there, no big deal. Okay, you could try out cutting a little bit different shape, okay, if you wanted to. I've done this before too, which is put the paper on there and then take your pencil and trace around the outside of the shape, and then you can cut out that green piece of paper, and then you can place that on there, and then you can add the color to it. So, or the other way that you can do it is put it on a white piece of paper, glue everything down, and then you can grab your color pencils or your crayons and actually just hand color the background. So we might try a little bit of all of those next time in the next part, but I also want to show you something else we can do. So you could stop right here with this, or you can come back for part 2 and see a couple of other ideas of how you can use this paper cut idea. Alright, for now, I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.